You ever notice this? Some people would rather be wrong forever than ask one honest question, not because they don't care about truth, but because something in them whispers, if I pull this thread, everything might fall apart. And that's the part nobody talks about. Because the real fear isn't being wrong. It's what happens after you realize you might be. The first crack. It usually starts small, almost invisible. A question you were never meant to ask, at least not seriously. Not out loud, of course. Just quietly, somewhere in the back of your mind, where no one else can hear it. Why does this not make sense? And the moment that thought appears, something shifts. You feel it before you can explain it. Not curiosity, not excitement, something tighter, something uncomfortable. Almost like you touched something you were not supposed to. Because deep down, you already understand what that question is really doing. It is not just about one detail. It is not just about one story or one rule. It is a thread. And if you pull it, even gently, there is a chance the whole thing starts to move. So instead of exploring it, your mind hesitates. It slows down. It changes the subject. Sometimes it even laughs it off, like when you make a joke to avoid an awkward silence at a family dinner. You tell yourself it is not important. You tell yourself you probably misunderstood, that someone smarter has already figured it out. But the question does not disappear. It lingers, quiet but persistent, like a tiny crack in a wall that was supposed to be solid. At first, it is easy to ignore. You can cover it with routine, with repetition, with the comfort of familiar words and beliefs. Here is the strange part, though. What feels threatened in that moment is not just the belief itself. It is not just one idea under pressure. It feels like something much bigger is at risk. Your sense of who you are, the way you see the world, the way the world sees you. Because if that one small question is valid, then it leads to another, and suddenly, it is not just a crack anymore. It is the possibility that everything you trusted might not be as stable as it once felt. It was never just about truth. We like to believe that our beliefs come from evidence, clean, rational, almost scientific. Facts line up, logic confirms them, and we arrive at what is true, right or wrong, simple as that. But that is not how most belief systems are actually formed, especially religious ones. They are not built like arguments. They are built like homes. You do not step into them as an adult and evaluate them piece by piece. You are born into them. You grow up inside them without noticing the walls going up around you. Your family is there. Your earliest memories are there. The way you learned what is good and what is wrong did not come from a textbook. It came from stories, habits, and people you trusted before you even knew what trust meant. So, over time, belief becomes more than an idea. It becomes a structure that holds your life together. Every lesson adds another room. Every ritual reinforces the walls. Every shared moment makes it feel more real, more permanent. That is why when someone says, just question it, it does not land as a simple suggestion. It does not feel like an invitation to think. It feels like a threat. Because what you hear is something very different. You hear, take a hammer to the place you were raised in. And even if part of you is curious, another part immediately resists. Suddenly, this is not about logic anymore. It is not about whether something is true or false. It becomes emotional. It becomes social. It becomes deeply personal. Because if that structure collapses, it is not just ideas that fall with it. It is relationships. It is belonging. It is the sense that you are part of something stable and shared. That is why people defend their beliefs the same way they defend their own family. And sometimes, if you look closely, even more fiercely. The hidden contract. Most belief systems come with an unspoken deal. It is never announced, never written down, and yet it is understood almost immediately. You can belong, you can be accepted, you can be part of this, as long as you do not question too much. No one sits you down and explains the rules. There is no formal agreement. But over time, you start to feel the boundaries. You notice which questions get smiles and which ones create tension. You learn, quietly, where the line is. And the moment you step even slightly outside that line, something shifts. Conversations slow down. People change the subject. There is a subtle discomfort in the air that is hard to describe but impossible to miss. Sometimes it is not even direct, you just get that familiar phrase. "Don't overthink it," said casually, almost kindly, like they are doing you a favor. But if you pause for a second, it is a strange piece of advice. Imagine hearing a noise in your car engine, and the mechanic tells you, "Don't overthink it." That would not comfort you. That would make you more suspicious. Because deep down, you know that important things are worth thinking about, especially when they do not quite make sense. The real issue is not the question itself, it is what the question represents. Because questioning does not just challenge an idea on paper. It signals that you are willing to step outside the shared understanding of the group. And that is where the tension comes from. Belonging is powerful. It gives people identity, safety, and connection. Losing it, even partially, can feel like losing a part of yourself. So people adapt. They learn which thoughts to follow and which ones to stop before they go too far. Not because they are incapable of questioning, but because the cost of questioning feels too high. And humans will accept a lot of contradictions, a lot of unanswered questions, even a lot of quiet doubt, if it means they do not have to stand alone. Doubt feels like betrayal. Here is where it gets uncomfortable. Not intellectually uncomfortable, but emotionally heavy in a way that is hard to explain if you have not felt it. For many believers, doubt does not feel like curiosity. It does not feel like a natural step toward understanding. It feels like betrayal, and not in a small, casual way. In a deep, personal way that carries weight. Because the belief is not just an idea sitting on a shelf. It is connected to people, to moments, to authority figures you trusted without question when you were younger. Parents who passed it down with good intentions. Traditions that shaped your sense of right and wrong. Rituals that gave structure to your life. So when doubt appears, it is not just challenging a statement. It feels like you are turning your back on all of that at once. Almost like questioning the belief is the same as questioning the people who gave it to you. And then there is the deeper layer, the idea that you are not just doubting people, but something divine, something ultimate. For many, that thought alone carries a quiet fear. Not always spoken, but always present. That is a heavy, emotional load for a simple question to carry. So, the mind adapts. It does something surprisingly efficient. It closes the door before the question has time to grow. It redirects attention. It replaces uncertainty with familiar answers. Not because those answers are stronger, but because they feel safer. If doubt equals betrayal, then thinking itself starts to feel risky. You begin to associate questioning with guilt, with discomfort, with the sense that you are stepping out of line. And once thinking feels dangerous, something important changes. External control is no longer necessary. No one has to tell you to stop. No one has to enforce the boundaries. You start doing it yourself, quietly, automatically, without even realizing it. The system no longer needs to protect itself from you. You begin protecting it. The fear of the void. Let's say someone does not stop. They do not shut the door. They follow the question, slowly, carefully, piece by piece. At first it feels manageable, like pulling at a loose thread on a sweater you have worn your whole life. But eventually, they arrive at a place that feels very different. What if this isn't true? That question does not sit quietly. It opens something. And once it opens, it is hard to close again. Because belief was never just about explaining a few things. It was doing a much bigger job in the background. It gave the world structure. It told you where you came from, why you are here, and what happens when it all ends. It gave answers to death, which is not exactly a small topic. It gave meaning to suffering, which otherwise feels random and unfair. It provided a sense of purpose, even on days when nothing seemed to make sense. So, when that belief starts to loosen, it is not just one answer that disappears. It is an entire framework. And what replaces it at first is not clarity. It is openness. Too much openness. It feels like standing in a space with no walls, no ceiling, no clear direction. There is nothing to lean on, no clear boundaries telling you where things begin or end. And that kind of openness can feel less like freedom and more like exposure. Like you are unsupported, floating without anything solid beneath you. Humans are not very comfortable in that state. We prefer structure, even if it is imperfect. We prefer a flawed map over no map at all. Because uncertainty does not feel neutral. It feels unstable. It feels like falling without knowing where the ground is. And belief, even when it has cracks, even when parts of it do not quite hold up under pressure, still feels like something solid. Something you can stand on. Something that keeps the void from opening too wide. Why being wrong is easier. Here is the paradox. Being wrong is often more comfortable than being uncertain. That sounds backwards at first. We are taught to value truth, to seek it, to correct mistakes. But in real life, the experience is different. If you never question a belief, you never have to confront whether it is wrong. It just sits there, stable, familiar, unquestioned. And that stability gives you something very appealing: certainty. You know what to think, what to say, how to act. There is a clear structure to your life. You are not constantly second-guessing yourself or reevaluating everything from scratch. You also get community, people around you who share the same assumptions, the same language, the same sense of what is right. That creates a kind of social safety net. You are not navigating the world alone. And then there is the map, a simple, ready-made guide for how to live. What matters, what does not, what comes next. For many people, that clarity is not just useful, it is comforting. Like using a GPS that never asks you to choose the destination, it just tells you where to go. Convenient, even if you are not entirely sure it is the best route. Now, compare that to questioning. Questioning removes those guarantees. It does not immediately replace them with something better. Instead, it creates a gap. You lose certainty before you gain clarity. You lose answers before you find new ones. Sometimes, you even lose people. Not always dramatically, not always all at once, but enough to feel the difference. Conversations change. Connections shift. Things that used to feel easy become more complicated. And what replaces all of that, at least for a while, is silence. Not peaceful silence, but the kind where you are left alone with your own thoughts, trying to figure out what is actually true. So when people choose certainty over truth, it is not necessarily because they cannot think critically. It is because certainty offers something immediate and tangible, while truth often demands a period of discomfort. Not because they are foolish, but because they are human, the brain's defense system. There is also something more mechanical happening underneath all of this. Not emotional, not philosophical, just the way the brain is built to function. Your brain is designed to protect your worldview. It does this automatically, without asking for permission. It filters the information you take in, highlights what fits, and quietly ignores what does not. When something contradicts what you already believe, it does not get a fair trial. It gets resistance. Familiar ideas feel right, not necessarily because they are correct, but because they are familiar. The brain treats them like safe territory. Known patterns, predictable outcomes, no surprises. You can think of it like a security guard standing at the entrance of your mind. Its job is not to discover truth. Its job is to maintain stability, to keep things running smoothly without constant disruption. And questioning, especially deep questioning, does not look harmless from that perspective. It looks like an intruder trying to get past the gate. So the brain responds the way it is designed to respond. It becomes defensive. It looks for ways to dismiss the question, to reinterpret it, or to replace it with something less threatening. Sometimes it even strengthens the original belief just to compensate for the discomfort. The important part is this happens quickly and often unconsciously. By the time you think you are evaluating an idea objectively, your brain may have already decided how it feels about it. That is why arguments rarely change minds. You can present facts, logic, even clear contradictions, and still see no movement. Because the discussion is not really about the idea on the surface. It is about what that idea is connected to underneath. Beliefs are tied to identity, and identity is something the brain protects very carefully. So, when you challenge a belief, you are not just offering new information. You are pushing against a system that is built to resist change, even if that change would lead closer to the truth. The quiet ones who do question. But not everyone stops. Not everyone shuts the door the moment things feel uncomfortable. Some people stay with the question. They do not rush to fix it or explain it away. They let it sit there, even when it feels awkward, even when it creates tension they cannot immediately resolve. And that is not easy. Sitting with uncertainty goes against almost every instinct we have. We want answers. We want closure. We want things to make sense as quickly as possible. But these people resist that urge. They allow the question to breathe. They follow it slowly, without forcing it into a neat conclusion. At first, it is messy, confusing in a way that is hard to organize. Thoughts contradict each other. Old beliefs clash with new observations. Nothing fits together cleanly. It feels a bit like opening an attic you have not touched in years. You expect a quick look, maybe a little dust. Instead, you find boxes you forgot existed, things that no longer make sense, things that once mattered but now feel out of place. And of course, there is dust everywhere. Not dangerous, just uncomfortable enough to make you wonder why you opened it in the first place. There is even a moment where you think it would be easier to just close the door again, leave everything as it was, no mess, no confusion. But if you keep going, something changes. Slowly, almost quietly, patterns begin to appear. Not perfect answers, not complete certainty, but a kind of clarity that feels different from what you had before. It is not loud. It does not announce itself. It does not need constant reinforcement from others. It is the kind of clarity that holds up even when you look at it from different angles. The kind that does not panic when questioned again. And maybe that is the key difference. It does not need to defend itself. What questioning really costs? Let's be honest for a moment. Questioning sounds noble from a distance, but up close, it has a cost. And not a small one. It can affect relationships, not always in dramatic ways, but enough to notice. Conversations become more careful. Some topics feel off limits. People who once understood you easily might start looking at you a little differently, like you have stepped slightly out of sync. You also lose certainty, that quiet confidence that you know how the world works, what is right, what is true. It is replaced, at least for a while, with something less stable. More questions than answers. And then there is that comfort, that feeling of having a clear structure to lean on. A system that tells you where things fit and why they matter. Letting go of that can feel like giving up something reliable, even if you know it was not perfect. So yes, questioning has a price, and it is not unreasonable that many people decide it is too high. But here's the part that rarely gets mentioned. What you gain in return is something very different. Not immediate comfort, not instant clarity, but something deeper. Ownership. You begin to see your thoughts as your own, not just something you inherited. You examine your beliefs instead of repeating them. You choose what you accept, what you reject, and what you are still unsure about. And that changes the relationship you have with your own life. Because instead of following a path that was laid out for you, you start shaping it yourself. Slowly, imperfectly, sometimes with hesitation, but consciously. The strange part is, many people never even realize this trait exists. They were given a framework early on, and it felt complete. It felt final. No one told them they had a choice. And if you do not know there is a choice, you never really question the cost of staying where you are. So, no, believers do not really fear being wrong. Being wrong can sit quietly for years without causing much trouble. What they fear is what comes after the question is allowed to grow. The unraveling. The silence that follows when old answers stop working. That uncomfortable space where nothing feels fully certain anymore. Because in that space, there is no script to follow. No ready-made structure waiting to guide you. And maybe that is the real story. It is not that people are afraid of truth. It is that truth asks something difficult in return. It asks you to stand without the walls you were given and decide, slowly and honestly, what you actually believe, without being told.